Max, thank you very much for joining today.
Thanks, Etienne.
I'm very glad to have you here. Maybe you can just start with yourself, introduce yourself and the company that you work for.
So Etienne, I'm Group CFO at Mukuru. I'm Max Havemann. Mukuru is a financial services business based in Cape Town, but servicing the African market. We see ourselves as providing the financial services platform for the emerging African consumer. So we operate across most of Southern Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa. We started off as a cross-border remittance company, but have expanded our services beyond that now. And we see ourselves operating as a neobank for the emerging consumer in Africa. One of the reasons I joined is that it's a very high growth organization. We have some pretty grand plans on where we want to get to as a company. We see ourselves as providing a financial services platform for the emerging African consumer, and that covers the entire continent, as well as some companies and countries outside of Africa. We have been fortunate enough to be growing at a rapid rate over the last couple of years. I think COVID was a massive multiplier for us in terms of what we could offer, because a lot of consumers were forced to move away from the informal market to a formalized solution. And we've got some pretty fancy pieces of tech which provide a very clean, safe, speedy service to our consumers. 30 seconds after you are depositing your money here in Cape Town, your family member can be receiving it in the middle of the rural heartland of Zimbabwe. It's that quick and that efficient. We've got a very brand loyal customer base throughout Africa. And because of that, I think we are very proud of what we do. We invest a lot of time in our solutions, and we are expanding our offering to our customers throughout Africa. So it's very exciting times at Mukuru, and looking forward to being a part of that journey. I think that's what excites all of us at Mukuru, because you get to go home at the end of every day with a feeling that you've actually contributed and that you've done something new. It's a great place to be.
Wonderful. It's great news. I'm really excited for your journey. Maybe let's get into your role with Mukuru and Outsourced CFO. Were there any specific challenges or needs that led you to seek financial talent solutions?
Yes, I was fortunate in that I had encountered OCFO before my time at Mukuru at a previous company. But generally, my background is that I've enjoyed working with high growth companies. So I prefer not to step into the larger corporate space. I enjoy the challenge of a day which is different every day when you walk into the office, when you're continually problem solving and developing solutions to problems that you encounter. So those are the types of companies I've always been involved with. At my previous company, the challenge was slightly different. But at Mukuru, I joined at a time when they were on a journey to mature their financial team and their processes. And so we needed a short-term solution to help us while we built and scaled our other resources in the business, to bridge that gap without having to hire a whole lot of permanent resource in the immediate term. And OCFO was a company I'd worked with before, had a relatively good experience with, and worked with yourself as well. And I thought it was a good opportunity.
All right, fantastic. And what made you choose Outsourced CFO's talent solutions than any other options that were in the market?
So I think we didn't have a lot of options back in the past when we were looking for temporary resource. I think some solutions did exist, but I think your specific model was kind of unique back in the day. And I think there are lots of more competitors you have nowadays. But I think my experience with OCFO in my previous role was very positive, and we formed a good partnership, which I always enjoy. And as a result of that, when I needed additional resource, I was happy to go back to OCFO and use you guys again.
Fantastic. Awesome. Maybe we can just expand a little bit about working with Outsourced CFO, the experience, how you interacted with them and the type of work that they did.
So as I mentioned earlier, I enjoy the challenge of working in companies where they're going through high growth phases and you're developing a finance function around that. I have my own personal philosophy on how a world-class finance function is built. And I find there are 4 different resources or levers which you can pull to build that team. And it's people, processes, systems, and policies. But I find you have to start with the people side, because you can't just take your existing teams that are in place and throw more work at them, ask them to do things which they haven't been doing before or aren't necessarily have the right skill set to do as well. So I find the first place you need to look is to build the right resources and people in place that can then help you with the other different levers, around policies and processes and systems. It also gives you some breathing space to allow you to recruit the right full-time staff, because I find if you don't get the right people in place, you're never going to succeed in building that team. And so you're not going to rush to make any decisions. You're not going to rush to hire someone just to get a headcount into a seat. You're going to be able to have the time to hire the right people for a long term, while having the benefits of temporary resource there to meet your immediate needs while you build that world-class finance team. So I think OCFO as a service provides that ability to us. I think one of the biggest benefits that I found at OCFO is the partnership that you guys have provided, and that's something I always emphasize with suppliers that I work with, whether or not they are audit firms or financial services firms or lawyers or whoever it is, travel firms. There has to be a partnership, and that's how I like to work. If I feel it's very one-dimensional or it becomes a commodity where you're just trying to extract value, I tend not to enjoy working with those types of companies, because I feel that it's not working for both of you, and you can't have open discussions about how you improve the relationship and how you both create value. I'm always cognizant of the fact that any company we work with is making their own way and are trying to create a viable product. So I never try to look at it as a commodity, but also appreciate where you can have an open conversation with someone about issues you've encountered, or perhaps issues of quality of delivery or rate cards or anything like that. And I always found Lo and yourself at OCFO open to those types of conversations. You guys were able to adapt your approach and offer alternative solutions that perhaps a larger, more rigid corporate would not be able to do. And I think that's key for me as a business, running a business, and having that flexibility and that ability to have a discussion at any time is key for me, because my demands are always changing. And that means that my solutions need to change with that.
Thank you, Max. I think let's speak a bit about the trust. How, the nuances with working with outsourced professionals. How do you inherit or create that trust with those individuals? And if there's any specific nuances with working with part-time or interim solutions?
So I think, like I talked earlier about hiring the right people, I tend to hire on personality, because the skill set you expect to come with that, at any level. And I view the same thing with suppliers and partners that we want to work with. I've been fortunate enough to work in a lot of different companies, whether back in my audit firm days, through to marketing companies, through to financial services, through to technology companies. I've worked in South Africa, in the UK as well. I spent 8 years there. And I think the same premise applies, that you've got to be able to look across the table and for there to be mutual respect of the individuals you work with. And a lot of it comes down to the company's culture that they have, whether or not they see things in a similar way, whether or not they are happy to collaborate and partner with you, or whether they're just trying to sell you a service and bank the revenue. And I think you need to find those partners and employees as well that view the world of commerce in the same way. Because if you don't start off on the same foot and you're battling against their company culture, or they view things just very differently, then you're always going to start off on the wrong foot. So I think, you never know until you really engage with the company. So that's always a risk. But generally, you should be able to tell during the pitch stage whether or not they buy into that. Although a lot of companies can sell pretty well. But I think you need to be able to adapt. And if you're not getting that collaborative effort, then you're not with the right people. And you need to make that call pretty soon, because I think even with something like temporary resource, the challenge always with temporary resources, how quickly they get up to speed on your business. Our business is incredibly complex. We are a fintech, which is growing the number of services we offer across 20 countries in Africa and Europe. And that requires quite a deep understanding of what we're doing. And so the risk for me is bringing on temporary resource, educating them for 3 months, and just as they're getting up to speed, we change tack and have to move elsewhere. And I think that's the challenge. But I was fortunate, as I said, that I worked with OCFO before. But that's the key thing. Right at the start, you need to be able to look the other person in the eye and tell if you're working from the same starting point and and company culture and attitude is what's going to determine that success. As I said, I think part of the success of our solutions have been your willingness to adapt. I think you must never be afraid to ask for something different or be able to give the feedback to suppliers or partners that you work with. And I think I've given you guys some pretty clear feedback in the past, and you can always agree to disagree, but you guys have often been able to adapt or look at things differently and come back with an alternative solution or something which worked for us, which is appreciative. And I think you've also before said to me, we can't do that, and you need to go somewhere else. And that's a sign of a mature company that's willing to be able to say what they can't do and step back from it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the clear communication, the feedback is especially important on the timelines, because you're working, within a few weeks you want to get onboarded with someone, and you really want to fast track that implementation of that onboarding of that person. So
yeah,
perfect.
Definitely. And I think, for those people looking for temporary solutions, you do need to be quite hard in terms of the people you choose, and I tend to overhire. So because of the short nature of what you're doing, and as I said, that the learning curve is so steep, particularly in our business, that you can't afford to sign a 6-month contract and not have those individuals operate at the level you need, because you're going to waste the time. And I've had that before as well, where people haven't performed. And I think you guys always have that risk of bringing in individuals who don't necessarily perform. But you can't play around with temporary resource. And I think maybe for those looking to take it on as a profession, and those individuals or professionals who want to move into a space like yours, I think the only advice I would say as a customer on that side is be prepared to work really hard, and you have to almost, the intensity of what you have to do exceeds perhaps what you might do in a full-time role. Because my expectations of a temporary resource coming in is almost higher than I would be of my existing staff, because I don't have time. I'm paying you at a higher rate to be able to execute something, and my expectations are just higher. So it's also maybe a bit of a warning for those who think it might be the easy route. It definitely isn't. But the rewards are there for it.
Yeah, and time is a commodity, and we strive to reduce your time spent on things that you don't want to do or don't need to do. Maybe we can go into a bit more specifics. Can you perhaps share an example of a project where our team played a crucial role in the successful execution?
So I think recently, with Mukuru, as I said, I joined and there was quite a lot of work to do. We were building a finance team, so we were busy hiring a lot of new roles. We created a whole lot of new roles. So we were working on the people side. We also desperately needed to upgrade our ERP or accounting systems. We were still working on a relatively simple accounting program, which wasn't fit for purpose. So we had to move to a larger ERP, which could handle our global business, do consolidations and FX rates and intercompany processing. And we didn't, you need to move fast. So I didn't want to wait necessarily to bed everything down in terms of the people before moving into the system implementation. So we managed to start the hiring process. We were going through a pretty intensive audit, and then started the system implementation, which, as anyone who's been through it before will know, it's not small or not simple. It'll give you pretty gray hairs, as you can tell. And what we did was we partnered with OCFO, who provided, I think, 4 individuals of varying different skill sets, but also up to 6 at one time, I think, who were there just to bridge that gap while we hired people, to give them the space to be able to focus on whether it was the audit or the system implementation, to help us, sort of resource both those projects at the same time. And look, it was still an extremely intensive period for the in-house team. But again, being able to have that temporary resource in-house for 6 to 9 months, I think we had at the end, it wasn't cheap. But the payback for that now meant that we could accelerate those different projects, and we'd be able to mature in our journey a lot quicker than we might not have during that time. But yeah, I think that's the trap that a lot of business owners who are transforming from a startup mentality to a larger business fail to recognize, is you just have to commit the resource to it. And you can't just ask your existing finance team to work longer hours, or, exhibit skills that they're not qualified for or haven't been experienced before. So, you have to commit upfront, and committing to temporary resource is far more cost effective, and you get a return far quicker than you would be having to hire all your full-time staff. Because as a finance professional, you should be always aiming for efficiencies. You shouldn't be, just hiring full-time headcounts, because you should be aiming to be more efficient in what you're doing. And so that's what a company like OCFO can give you.
Wonderful. How would you measure that ROI if you were to get an interim solution versus the ultimate benefit of it? Is that a difficult calculation to do? It's an estimate, and sometimes you have to, look back and look forwards at the same time.
Yeah. It's very difficult. I mean, ROI in a service type organization, which I'd say finance is always difficult to measure. And I always give our marketing team a hard time because I'm always asking them for their ROI in terms of their investments. And I think if you've got a vision and you've got a plan of where you need to get to, you're only going to find out amounts of resource to be able to execute that plan. So I think in the finance world, there are certain areas which are non-negotiable. And specifically in fintech, we have a compliance environment we need to operate within, which, as anyone who's worked in financial services or in the compliance world realizes that there's no bending those rules. If you need to deliver certain reports at a certain date, that's non-negotiable. But also, if you know where you want to get to in 5 years' time, in the example I was talking about earlier, if you want to deliver a finance system now to be more mature in 3 years' time, or you can wait 2 years and then implement it, you're compromising your later deadlines. And there's a cost that comes with that. So in the regulatory world, there are fines and other regulatory hurdles you may encounter. You may lose your license if you don't meet those hurdles. From an operational perspective, you're delaying the ability of your finance team to deliver on their KPIs. And moving a finance team from a purely transactional function to a strategic function where they are able to add value to the business. Our key customers are internal the majority of the time in finance. And so if we're not getting the strategic leaders of the business the right information on a timely basis, the business can't go in the right direction because they don't know what are the data points they're using. And those are kind of how I've measured the return on it. I managed to convince the board and got their full support to spend a not insignificant amount of money with OCFO. But the rewards are that we are sort of a year to 18 months ahead of where we would have been without that, and saved some potential risks on the regulatory side.
All right, so on the back of that, would you say that there would be some long-term benefits as well, in using that or fast-tracking that financial execution from a part-time point of view, if you estimate or you project forward what you need?
Definitely. I mean, if you talk about exponential returns down the line, we've been able to start a lot of our detailed analysis of our full business because we now have this integrated, consolidated financial system in place. Whereas if we hadn't employed the temporary resource, we probably would not have implemented it yet. So we are at least 18 months ahead of where we would have been otherwise. So the returns to the business and our ability to strategically plan on what our next steps are, what environments we want to go into, what locations, what products we can offer, how we measure the risks of doing those are massively enhanced now. So that means I can go to market sooner than I would have otherwise in those situations. So yeah, I think you have to be looking long term. You can't have a short term view in something like this. And I think if you're trying to plaster over a hole now, you're not going to see the ROI because there is long-term benefits to it. I'm sure maybe there are short-term benefits. If we suddenly we knew we were behind on our audit and needed 3 more people to help draft financial statements, which I think we actually have used you for before. Yeah, that's a good example of a very short-term scenario. But I think when you're looking at temporary resource, for us, there was a long-term goal for what we needed.
Would you recommend OCFO's talent solutions to other entities and businesses? And if so, why?
Look, I think, there are lots of different factors that come into play. So I said yes for what we needed at the time. I think I appreciated all the benefits that I've talked about before with OCFO. I'm not here to advocate, blindly for it. I think, as I said, if finance professionals want to see the return on what they're doing, it has to be a very carefully thought out process on what they want to get out of that project, what type of skill sets they need, because if they're not explaining to you what they're looking for, it's very difficult for you as a company to be able to resource against it. They have to commit the resources themselves to it in terms of monetary resource. If they know the project is going to be 12 months, they have to be able to pay for that resource 12 months. And they have to have a very clear end goal on the project that they're scoping for. If you don't, it's like any project. If you don't, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And so I think it's not a silver bullet. OCFO, you guys are good at what you do, and I appreciate the collaboration we have. So yes, I would, advocate for you, and I would recommend you to people who have asked, and I have recommended you to people who have asked before. But just a temporary warning to other finance professionals, say do your planning as well. It's not a silver bullet. Throwing people at problems only works if you've got all the planning behind it that goes into it. But yeah, I've had a very pleasing experience with OCFO, and happily will continue to work with you.
Fantastic. Is there any final advice you would give to companies that are seeking some interim solutions, and perhaps from experiences that you did have with Outsourced CFO that you'd like to share?
I think we touched on it at the start, but I think the communication piece is so clear, because like you would with a normal employee, that feedback loop is important. But because your timelines are accelerated, the feedback loop has got to be accelerated. So when the temporary resource arrives on set, you've got to be very prepared to onboard them very quickly. So you have an onboarding plan, you've got to get them up to speed very quickly. You can't just say, I'm too busy to chat you through it, just go and sit with so-and-so for a week and listen to them. You can't do that, because again, you're wasting money and you're wasting time on it. So you've got to be ultra prepared for those individuals for the day they arrive, that they're going to get to know your business intimately, so that they can do what they are prepared to do for your business. And then in terms of the feedback loop to the likes of the management team at OCFO, be open. Be open about your concerns, be open about what your goals are, treat them with respect, and then the respect will be reciprocated, I'm sure. And I think open, honest feedback is what any service organization wants. And so, yeah, I think that's the only thing I would add on what we said earlier. But yeah, don't be afraid to talk up, get involved as a finance leader in your business, invest the time in that temporary resource, and it'll be returned to you. So,
Max, thank you very much for coming and discussing some of the synergies that we have with Outsourced CFO and Mukuru and some of the previous entities. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate your time and your experience and expertise.
Pleasure. Thanks so much, Etienne.
Thank you. Thank you, Max.